Welcome, everyone. I'm Ellen Gray, a features writer at the Inquirer. Thank you for joining us at Inquirer Live, where our guest today is novelist Sadeqa Johnson. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. At any time during the discussion, you can submit questions for Sadeqa Johnson. Please ask your questions in the comments section at the bottom of this page. If you're watching us on a social platform like Facebook or YouTube, please join us for the Q&A at inquirer.com/yellowwifelive to submit your questions. As time allows, we'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end. Sadeqa Johnson is the award-winning author of 4 books, including Yellow Wife, which was published earlier this month. Oh, the Oprah magazine called it one of the most anticipated historical novels of 2021. She lives outside Richmond, Virginia, where Yellow Wife is set, but she's very much from Philly. She grew up in Logan, attending Holy Child on Broad Street and George Washington Carver High School of Engineering and Science. She fed her first love reading at the Free Library's Logan branch, where the librarian used to keep her well supplied with books. I'm so happy to welcome Sadeqa Johnson, the author of Yellow Wife, to Inquirer Live.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, it's so nice. Happy Friday.
Happy, and you left off that I'm a big lover of soft pretzels with lots of mustard.
Good. Well, then that you truly are from Philly. So tell us a little bit about Yellow Wife. After 3 contemporary novels, what inspired you to write about an enslaved woman in 1850s Virginia?
Yeah, so Yellow Wife was a story that I discovered really by accident. We had moved to the Richmond area in 2015, and in 2016, we had some friends come to visit, and we were really just looking for an activity that we could do with the kids and with this family, our family friends. And we took them downtown to the Richmond Slave Trail. And it was walking along the slave trail, we began to read the different markers on the trail, and we would have the kids kind of take turns. And I remember the children were reading the marker that talked about the Lumpkins jail. And what really struck me right away was that it was described as a place that was horrific. It was one of the worst places on earth. The Lumpkins jail was a punishing center for the enslaved, and also a place for trading. The owner, Robert Lumpkin, they called him the bully trader, but it said that he was married to a Black woman named Mary Lumpkin. And it also said that he treated his family with love, and he cared for her, and he cared for their 5 children. That contradiction is what really kind of struck me. Was like, how could he be this evil man, but he loved this Black woman and their children together? So at first, I just kept thinking about her. What was it like for Mary Lumpkins living in this horrific situation where, she was enslaved herself and also witnessed this brutal man and the way he treated the fellow enslaved. And then how did she raise these children? And they lived on a half acre. Like, how did all that take place? What was it like for her? And that was really the beginning of the story kind of planting itself under my skin.
What did your kids think at the time? Did they have questions too?
They were really, they weren't small, but I think they were interested in the history, but they were probably a little bit more interested in the outing of it, just kind of walking and being in the fresh air and that sort of thing. I don't think that they realized what was going on inside my head and inside my body as we were walking through the slave trail.
Well, you started work on Yellow Wife several years ago, but is there something about it you think speaks particularly to this time in history?
I really believe that everything that is happening in this country, everything that's transpired in the last year with the uprisings and with our past president and the militia and everything, it all goes back to the foundation of which our country was founded on, and that was slavery. So I feel like this story is always timeless because history continues to repeat itself. And if we know where we came from, it's a lot easier to figure out where we are now and how we can move forward.
Well, one thing you did in Yellow Wife was you gave your character, Phoebe, some of Mary Lumpkin's history, but you told a story about how she really might have felt. Not that we ever know. I often wonder when somebody says, "Oh, but he treated his wife and children well." How do we know?
Mhm.
Who wrote that history?
Yeah, I agree with you. When I was doing my research, I did not find a whole lot on Mary Lumpkins. I'm a fiction writer at heart. That's what I do. And so for me, as a fiction writer, what I try and do is I try and stay as close to the information as possible. But I also need to have space for my brain to do what it loves to do, and that is creating fiction. I love to create
Mm.
stories. So I set Phoebe, who's based on Mary Lumpkins, but I thought that it was important for her to start off in a plantation. I didn't find any research about where she was before she landed at the jail. And so in my story, Phoebe Dolores Brown is a 17-year-old mulatto girl. She's the daughter of the master of the plantation with his favorite slave, Ruth. Ruth is the medicine woman on the plantation, as well as the loom, the seamstress. She works in the loom house.
Mhm.
So she teaches her daughter how to work in the loom house. Phoebe's also favored by the master's sister who never had children. And she kind of takes Phoebe under her wing. She educates Phoebe. She teaches Phoebe how to play piano. And Phoebe has been promised that she will be free on her 18th birthday. It's something she's known her entire life. So what happens in Yellow Wife is that a series of events take place. Phoebe is completely thrown off guard, and she finds herself at what I call the Lapierre jail, which is one of the most horrific places. It's a punishing center. It's a place where slaves are traded. And there she has to figure out how to survive, not only for herself, but also for her family.
You originally wanted to be an actress, I know, and you studied theater both at the Freedom Theater in North Philly and in college. Do you think that training helps you when you're setting a scene?
Absolutely. Writing for me is a little bit of method acting, which is that you really have to embody the character, the spirit of the character. A lot of times I'm sitting at my computer and I'm really just looking out the window. I'm daydreaming. I'm waiting for the characters to enter me. I have to coax my characters out to speak to me, particularly when I haven't been with them for a couple of days. So I spend a lot of time, like I journal crazy, like all the time. But I'll say, like when I was writing Phoebe, I would write on the page, "Hey, Phoebe, what is it that you want me to know today? What's going on with you?" And I just wait for her energy to kind of enter me. As a writer, I feel like I'm the conduit, that the story flows through me. And it's my job to just be the typist, to catch the energy, to catch what they're trying to tell me, and to really let those fictional characters do what they want to do through me, because it is their story. And the story always comes out so much better when I honor those voices that I hear, as opposed to me trying to manipulate the story to be what I think it's supposed to be.
Well, then I talked to a couple of authors a few weeks ago who are sisters, and they write together.
Mhm.
And one of them said that one of them was a pantser and one of them was a plotter. It's Do you think of yourself as either one of those things? Do you write by the seat of your pants, or do you plot really rigorously?
So I'll tell you, I was a pantser on my first novel, which was Love in a Carry-On Bag. That book took me 10 years to write for a whole bunch of reasons, but being a pantser, I think also added to it. So the last three books, I do start with a synopsis. So with Yellow Wife, I start with an idea. I go on this trail,
Mhm.
get this energy. I go to the site where the Lumpkins jail was, which was also, I felt the energy right next to where the Lumpkins jail was. There was the African burial ground, which was a sacred land in Richmond. And that is where, because the bodies from the Lumpkins jail were just kind of tossed and thrown,
Mhm.
there was no ceremony behind it. And so this is the space in Richmond that their bodies are buried. And you could feel that energy. Like you can feel the energy. It was almost like the slaves were the ancestors were waiting for me to come, because we felt it. Like so much so that the children started to kind of dance when we got to that part of the land.
Mhm.
And it was like we could hear the drums and all of that. So I feel like that spirit kind of came home with me. And I just started with the researching online, trying to figure things out. The next step is I call up my agent and I say, hey, this is the story that just hurt me. This is what I'm thinking. And she lets me talk it out for however long it takes. Then she says, go synopsis. So from all of that research, all of that energy, everything I felt, now I sit down at the computer and I just write a couple pages of synopsis. And I let that grow and grow and grow. And then from there, I'm a three-part writer. So I need to know part 1, part 2, part 3. So I break the story up. I figure out what the arcs are, but I don't color everything in. And so that happens as the story progresses. So I have an idea of where I'm going. I know the major plot points, but I don't always know which highway I'm going to take to get to those major plot points. That's when I let the characters kind of speak through me.
It's funny because it sounds like the outline of a 3-act play too.
For sure. And I think because I have a theater background. So I was a theater major in college and I studied playwriting. And that is the same way I approach novel writing, is the same way that playwrights approach their work. Do
you set yourself a goal, like a certain number of words a day, or do you skip days when you're not feeling like it? How does it?
The last 2 weeks have been challenging for the novel that I'm working on now, particularly because there's a lot of promotion that's going into Yellow Wife. So it's hard for me to like really focus. But without that, my normal is I usually set times. I don't do it by words. So right now I'm just trying to write 2 hours a day. If I can get 2 hours a day in, at least the other story is starting to move along while I'm working on Yellow Wife. When I don't have anything else on my plate, then I will increase that. So maybe 3 hours or 4 hours, depending on what else is going on and where I am in the story. If I'm in the editing process and I have a deadline to get it to my agent, then I'm pretty much doing it from the time I wake up until like when I have to stop to deal with my children, which is about 3 o'clock or so.
Well, you're also now dealing with what a lot of people are, your kids. How many of your kids are in school right now?
All
at home?
My kids are home in virtual school. We're still virtual. They've been home since March. Which has been a bit of a, in the beginning was a bit of a challenge because I'm really used to the quiet from 8 to 2 to, do what I need to do. And so to have them kind of bursting in anytime they feel like it is, it's been a challenge. And it's also hard for me to put up boundaries because they are here. So a little part of me feels like, a big part of me feels like I'm a mom first. I'm a stay-at-home mom first, and then I'm a writer second. So towing that line is always, is always a challenge for me.
I wonder, because I follow a lot of writers on Twitter, whether there'll be a delay in books that will come from the pandemic because so many of their children were home.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Yeah.
Before you were an author, you worked in book publishing as a publicist for other authors, including JK Rowling, which is really impressive. And then you ended up self-publishing your first book, and it paid off for you because you got a 2-book deal after that. Is this something you'd recommend to other writers who are having trouble getting publishers' attention, or do you think it was better if you could go through the usual channels?
I would say that where I am today, right now with Yellow Wife, is because of my whole entire history. Everything that I've done up to this point is a culmination of where I am right now with Yellow Wife. And so, working in publishing, I learned so much from my bosses. I worked in publicity, and I had really good bosses who taught me how to do business, how to cross every T and dot every I, how to be, on time and how to go after what I want. I remember when Second House from the Corner came out, my old boss reached out to me and she said, Sadeqa, don't ever forget that you are your biggest advocate. And I took that as you are your biggest marketing publicity person. So don't lose sight of that, even though you now have people who are helping you, now that you have the machine behind you, don't lose sight of that. So I really learned a lot about business and about being an author while working in publicity. Self-publishing, oh my gosh, that is difficult thing to do, particularly if you want to do it at a high level. And when I went into self-publishing, and actually my publishing company was called 12th Street Press because I grew up on 12th Street in Logan. I grew up at 12th and Somerville. And so I named my company 12th Street Press. But, it's a lot of work because, I had to hire an editor. I had to pretend to be a sales team. I would change my name and call different bookstores and say, hey, do you have Love in a Carry-On Bag? Would you like to get it? So I was selling myself, not, pretending that it wasn't me. And so I wore so many hats. I was booking. I literally went to every book festival up and down the East Coast. I was selling books out in the hot sun. I remember the Harlem Book Festival was the middle of July. And it was our very first book festival. And it literally was 98 degrees. And it was 98 degrees for the entire day. And I was out there, selling my book, but I learned a lot, And so every where I am right now is because of how hard I've worked to get to this point. And I needed all of that, I needed all of that experience to be right here where I am today. So, looking back, it was hard, but I wouldn't trade any of it.
And now you're having to run a book tour from your house, which you couldn't have anticipated when you were writing.
No, because the book tour is the fun part, Ellen, going out and getting on planes and trains and going to bookstores and meeting people. And, all of that to me is the fun part. I'm a social person, so being out and about, that's the fun part. But I will say that having a book tour from home virtually has definitely increased my reach. I could go to dinner. I could have dinner downstairs with my family, come back upstairs in my office, and I'm on with a book club in California, and so it definitely, there's pros and cons to it.
Well, it makes a lot of things more accessible to people who might not have been able to get there. But yes, you don't get to press the flesh at all. You also work with some students in the MFA creative writing program at Drexel. What's the best piece of advice you've gotten about writing, and what's the best piece of advice you think you've given someone else?
The biggest thing about writing, because people always send me emails and say, hey, I have this idea for a book. What should I do? And the best advice that I've gotten was keep your butt in the chair. Basically, writing is more about the discipline of doing it on a daily basis than anything else, because the momentum is everything, And so my writing teacher, one of my first writing teachers, used to say 20 minutes before bed. If you write for 20 minutes before bed, before you know it, that 20 minutes turns into 30 minutes. And then 30 minutes turns into 45 minutes. And before you know it, you're writing 2 hours a day. And so just start off small. You don't have to quit your job because you want to write a novel. Just start where you are and just make a commitment to yourself and to your work that you're going to show up every day, preferably at the same time. Right now, I try and show up by 9 o'clock. I try and be on my computer writing. That's my time. You start to train your brain at 9 o'clock. This is when your muse is coming, So just show up for yourself and for your writing and just make it a daily habit. And small chunks are better than long chunks. If I sit, sometimes I get more done in an hour than if I'm sitting at my computer for 4 or 5 hours, because I feel like I have all this time, and I'm not really getting anywhere. So, really just show up for yourself and be disciplined and keep your butt in the chair.
And this is what you're telling students now, I take it?
For sure. And I really have enjoyed my time at Drexel and working with the MFA students. It's a whole different world for me to be able to see their stories through their eyes and be able to kind of share what I've learned, both on the publicity side of the business, but also as a writer, traditionally published and self-published. So I'm able to give them that full package, that full experience. And so it's been a really wonderful journey. I really enjoy it.
That's good.
And not to mention, I grew up not far from Drexel. So it really, it makes me feel like I want to throw my pom-poms up. Yeah.
The bibliography at the end of Yellow Wife is really interesting. How often were you drawn down rabbit holes as you researched the book? And did you have a favorite reference that maybe others might use to research their families, for instance?
Often I had to stop myself. because the history of our country, particularly in that time period, I mean, there are so many stories to get caught up in. So many stories that need to be told, so many voices, so many souls out there that are just waiting for their story to be told. And so I had to really take a very narrow approach to my research so that I wouldn't get caught up. So, for instance, I primarily visited plantations in Virginia just so that I get the Virginia story, because that's going to be very different than the New Orleans story, right? So I really focused my attention on the plantations in Virginia. All of the books that I read, I went to the Library of Virginia and checked out books about Virginia slavery and 1800 things like that. But it was difficult. I remember doing research on the Trail of Tears, which talked about the migration of the slaves from Maryland and Virginia and how they got down south, and how that was, often worse than being in Maryland and Virginia. The further down south you got, the harder your life was. And, and how that happened, and how people were just stolen out of Pennsylvania and free places and sold down the river, as they called it. And so all of that was really interesting. And I had to kind of put the brakes on, because it's another story that, would want to be told. So I really had to catch myself and really try and keep my focus on Virginia.
Did you see some stories you'd like to revisit later?
So it took me about 3 years of research and writing this book. And, when you read the book, there are a lot of difficult scenes. And I spent so much time in that world that for my own self, I think I'd need a break. It's like, it's hard to stay there for so long. I mean, I was on the beach reading the incident and life of Harriet Jacobs. Is that her name? Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. The incident life of a slave girl by Harriet Jacob. And I was reading slave narratives by Charles Ball. I was reading The Known World. So those books are heavy, and people are on the beach reads, and I'm supposed to be relaxing, but I'm in this world. So, I had to stay in that world in order to create the setting and to kind of world build so that it felt authentic. But once I came out of it, it's like, whew, okay.
Yeah.
I need to do that for a little while.
No, I think it could be very heavy to deal with.
Yeah.
We talked about this before, and you said you felt it was a privilege to be their voice, but I think it must take a toll.
Yes, it takes a lot of energy. And like I said, embodying the characters is like, I feel it, I feel it. I feel their souls moving through me. So yeah, and I enjoyed every bit of writing Yellow Wife, but I think for the next book, I'm going to take a step back and go in a different direction.
Well, knowing all the things you know now about its past, what is it like to walk the streets of Richmond for you?
So I haven't been walking the streets too much because we're in the pandemic. But I was privileged to go downtown and see a few of the monuments as they were being removed, or seeing people protesting the monuments. And, that felt good to feel like Yellow Wife was a part of that movement, that it's all kind of working together for the same goal. So that really, brought me in. My family and I recently went back to the slave trail in November. And that was the first time I had gone since discovering the story. I literally discovered the story that one time, and I never went back. I just started creating the story in my head. And when we went back the second time, it was really interesting that the story that I felt that first time was completely not there. I mean, it wasn't, it was waiting for me at that moment. But when I came back, it was like I already got it. And so the feeling of walking the slave trail and visiting doing the same exact thing I did before had a completely different feel. The energy was different.
It's interesting. One of the things when I looked up Richmond Slave Trail, the first thing you get in the Google search, it says Richmond Slave Trail - Virginia is for lovers. there's kind of a strange thing about historical tourism.
Yes, yes. Oh, wow, that is.
I mean, they are selling their history, but um, let's see. Well, what can you tell us about your next book, the one you're working on now, without giving too much away?
Yeah, I can't really give too much away. I am in the absolute beginning stages. I'll say this, it's gone through. Let me have that conversation with my agent and talk it all the way through. I've done the synopsis. I have a bit of a chapter outline. But basically, I feel like I've been bit by the historical fiction bug. And so I definitely want to stay in the past. Now I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. I'm working in the 1950s. And
Mhm.
this story is set primarily, or the story is set between Philadelphia and DC, which is really awesome for me because I've written 4 books, and only Second House from the Corner, there's a portion of that story that takes place in Philadelphia,
Definitely.
which is near, it was just so wonderful to write all of that. Like I could just feel it just was great. And so in working with this 5th novel, a portion of the book is set in North Philadelphia, 1950s. And my mom's family and my mom's whole family, my grandmother and all of them, they grew up in North Philadelphia. My dad's family
Mhm.
grew up in South Philly. And so as a child, and I grew up in Logan, but as a child, I went between, all those places. I spent time with
Mhm.
my parents in both places. But there's something about North Philly. I can't really say what it is because in Second House from the Corner, my main character Felicia found herself in North Philly, and now this new book is kind of finding itself in North Philly. There's a lot of history there that I've been able to
Mhm.
uncover that I'm going to color the story with. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
And you have, I assume, sources in your family who remember North Philly in the 50s.
Yes, I was picking my dad's brain and my mom's brain about certain things. And my dad really is more South Philadelphia, but I can still kind of piece it together, who lived
Mhm.
there, what portion was Black, what portion was Italian, what portion was Jewish, and where the lines were drawn and how they all interact together. And so that's been interesting for me so far. And the research of it is always, the fun of it.
Do you think once you get the vaccine and you can travel again, you'll be here doing some research
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. And
and
yeah.
and of course visiting your
And
family?
visiting my beautiful family that I haven't seen in a very long time. Yes.
Very hard. Um, well, I have to say there were some characters in Yellow Wife, particularly toward the end, that I did want to know more about. Um, if you, I don't know, it's like I think the period, like Reconstruction, seems right for a historical novel because so little is really known about it.
Hmm. Yeah, Reconstruction actually is a very interesting time too. And it's funny because my husband is really interested in Reconstruction, and he's always reading. There's a book called Black Fortunes that the book starts with Reconstruction. And he was like, you got to read this. It's fascinating. So that is
Mhm.
definitely a period that I think I could be interested in as well. Maybe for book 6, we'll see.
Yeah, I know. I'm just writing your books down the road for you.
Ellen, I appreciate it. We always need
Yeah.
a helping hand.
Is there well, you don't live here anymore, but is there anything you say or do besides pretzels that marks you as someone from Philly, that anybody would know you were from Philly?
That's a good question. Hmm. I don't know if there's anything that I say or do that would mark me. Well, the sports, okay? Like I'm a huge Eagles fan. Yeah,
Okay,
every Sunday I'm walking around Virginia in my Eagles jersey. We still root for the Sixers, and my kids are not from Philly. They actually were born in New Jersey, but they are all Eagles fans as well. And so,
good.
we claim our Philly sports for sure.
We have some questions from some of our viewers. Here's one. Have you ever done any ancestry or genealogy research? And did you ever get the feeling there was something personally, ancestrally speaking to you through this story
Oh,
or in any of your past novels?
that's a great question. One of my cousins actually, on my mom's side, had been doing our our family tree for a number of years. So when I started working on Yellow Wife, I asked her if I could have access to what she had built. And so I
Mhm.
look at the tree in some place. Sometimes I took names off the family tree. I also used a lot of names from slave ledgers that I found because I wanted to make sure that this story, Yellow Wife, paid complete homage to our ancestors. I wanted every bit of it, even for the voices that I couldn't tell their complete story. I at least wanted to get their names into the story. So the names in the book were a combination of people who were enslaved in my family from the family tree that I got
Oh,
from my,
really?
as well as the slave ledgers that I found. And as a matter of fact, Phoebe's great grandmother in the story, her name is Viney Brown, and Viney Brown was my maternal grandmother had told me about a relative named Viney Brown.
Oh,
She was on my family tree, and so I wanted to. I just love that name, Viney. Like I feel like
yeah.
my name is Viney anymore. I just loved it, and so I used that in the story.
Well, yeah, that's sort of that. So it kind of makes it more personal for you.
And that's what I love
Um,
about writing is that, there's a piece of me in every novel. Like I could see myself in most of the characters prior to Yellow White, because the first three books were contemporary fiction. So even with like Love in a Carry-On Bag, it was a love story between, it was a long distance love story between a woman who lived in New York and a guy who lived in DC. They really wanted to be together. And I was a part of Erica, but I was also a portion of Warren in the story. He was a musician and he was sensitive. And so I was able to give him some of my characteristics, but also listen to who he was at the same time. So there's a part of me, in every story. And Second House from the Corner, Felicia was a mom who was, drowning in motherhood. She had these 3 small kids and she got married with secrets and she was afraid they were going to come out of her closet. And while I didn't get married with secrets, thank goodness, those 3 small children. And I remembered, what it felt like to be on the playground, sleep deprived and feeling like I was losing myself. And what was that like? And I wanted to give that a voice because I knew that there were women who were like Felicia and they needed to see themselves in the story. One of the greatest compliments I get from readers is when they say, "Oh my gosh, that felt just like me," or "I went through that," or "I had a cousin that spoke to me." That's when I know that I'm doing my job as a fiction writer. When people really
mhm.
identify with the characters and they see themselves in the story.
Well, do you think you'll get maybe a different level of fan from a historical novel? People who might not have read the contemporary one, because you said you like historical novels, and I think a lot of people read a lot of them. Do you have a favorite author beside who does this sort of work?
Yeah, I definitely see my fan base growing. And a lot of the book clubs that have reached out to me that want to host me for Yellow Wife have been historical fiction fans. So not necessarily
Mhm.
contemporary. A lot of them say, "Oh my goodness, I never heard of you before, until this book," which I'm totally okay with. I'm really glad that Yellow Wife is discovering a new brand of readers for me because it takes all of us. It takes a village to build a bestseller. And so it's been a real blessing to have this book reach into different corners and places that it hadn't been before. When I was growing up, books and authors who really inspired me, I think I told you this over the phone when we interviewed together, but like I was that kid who I went to the library and I checked
Mhm.
7 books a week. And I literally read 1 book a day, like so much so that I was in 7th grade and I would stick my book behind my textbook and I was reading constantly. I don't know anything that happened in 7th grade
I
math.
I don't understand how you got away with it, because I also went to Catholic school and I also did that, and I got in lots of trouble for it.
I got away with it. My 7th grade teacher, thinking back to it, I sat towards the back of the class and I just think he was distracted. I think he was just distracted, but
Mhm.
I read every day in 7th grade. I remember that. But yeah, so I read a lot. And when I got to high school, I think is when I started to read authors who made me feel like, oh, like this is a possibility of something, not that I thought I was going to be a writer, because I thought I was going to be an actress, but reading Maya Angelou, I read her whole autobiography series. I remember, and I still have the originals of those books, from I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing all the way up to the 4 or 5 books that she wrote. Those books touched me in a different way, because it was the first time that I saw on the page writers who looked like me, that had experiences that, I could identify with as, an African-American girl growing up in Philadelphia. Terry McMillan, Mama, touched me in a way. Her first book, Mama, I felt like she was talking directly to me. That was the first book that I read twice, because I identified so much with that character. I closed the book and immediately picked it up and started reading it again. When I got a little bit older, Zora Neale Hurston was a harder read. But when I read Eyes Were Watching God, once I got into the cadence of the rhythm of the way she told a story, I was hooked. So it was a lot of authors like that who early on. Eric Jerome Dickey was another writer. He just passed away recently. He was another writer who, I was at the bookstore the day his books came out. And a Philadelphia writer, Bebe Moore Campbell, she really, Sweet Summer. I grew up actually in Philadelphia. Her daughter and I went to Freedom Theater together, and she would come every summer. And so she and I were friends. And I remember we went to the bookstore in Cheltenham Mall, and we were just walking through the bookstore because, I'm always looking for books. And she picked the book up and she said, "Oh, this is my mom's book." And I almost fell completely out. I could not believe that her mom was an author, whoa, that was big stuff for me. And so, she was another writer who always reached back for me, always gave me good advice. She was definitely a major force. Oh, and to bring that moment full circle, when I worked at Putnam, her last novel came out, and I was actually the publicist on.
Oh, wow.
72-Hour Hold was her last book, and I was the publicist on that book. And so that was a complete and utter full circle moment for me in my life. Yeah.
I understand you also have 3 autographed JK Rowling Harry Potter books.
3 autographed books that are very high up on my bookshelf that my children are not allowed to read or touch. But yeah, working with JK Rowling was amazing. She was so sweet. So sweet. And even when I wasn't working on, so I worked on the first 3, but the other 2 books I had been reassigned to something else. She always made sure I got an autographed copy. And she would say, "Hey, Sadeqa, missed you. Wish I'd seen you this time. Hope you're well." All of that. So yeah, that's my coveted collection.
And now you know how to treat publicists, of course.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's see. Somebody here, well, I think we've already asked about, somebody's saying, what do you like to read? Do you like stories completely different from what you write?
A lot of times I like to read what I'm writing. So when I was writing Yellow Wife, I read a lot of books about slavery, fiction and nonfiction. Right now, I've kind of in between. So I started to read a little bit of mystery, which is different for me. I'm reading the Highway. Well, I just finished it actually, but I just finished the Highway 59 series by Attica Locke. She has books in that series. So I just finished Heaven My Home, which she is an amazing writer. She's one. So for me as a reader, as a reader, 2 things have to be happening. I have to be entertained, but I also have to learn something. So I have to be learning something from the writer and the writing style that's going to enhance my own writing. And to me, that's when it's a good book. So those are 2 books. I'm also now being asked to blurb other books, which this is a first for me. So I'm reading a book called Island Queen by Vanessa Riley, which is a pre-Civil War. Well, it's not even Civil War because it's an island story, but it's about slavery in the islands, and that one's coming out in July. So I'm reading that, and then I'm listening. This is my first time doing Audible. I'm like the last Mohican to catch up with Audible.
Really?
I don't know why, but I just started listening to, because I'm going to be working with Kate Quinn. She's also a historical fiction writer. She and I are going to be doing an event in next week, actually. So I started listening to the Alice Network, which is historical fiction for her. So
that's about the women who were spies, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, I haven't read it yet.
I'm only on chapter 3. And being my first Audible book, I'm like, I should go for a run, not because I want the exercise, but more I want the time to listen to the book.
I know. Sometimes I listen to books sometimes when I'm walking the dog or something.
It's a whole new world for me, Ellen.
Yeah.
Where have I been?
Yes, you can read all the time.
I know.
Something think, because you have a background in public relations, do you ever have to fight those instincts while you're trying to write authentically? Which is an interesting little, the implication being that not all PR people tell the truth, or
well, I do think that my PR team at Simon & Schuster really values the fact that I have the background, because we work together now as a partner. You know, I bring ideas to the tables, they bring ideas to the tables, and we really collaborate in that way. So I think it's beneficial to me, of course, because I'm the author, but I know that they really appreciate the knowledge that I bring from having a PR background.
I guess the questioner is asking is whether it affects your writing, because you probably wrote press releases and things for years. Do you write differently?
So listen, I was never good at press releases. I never was a good pitch writer. Like that pitch, you have to do a pitch letter and a press release. And I absolutely dreaded it. So the fact that I have someone else doing that for me is such a bonus. So I don't have to think too much about that. But it doesn't really affect my writing so much. I will say this about, publicity and being able to pull back the curtain a little bit on publishing. I still write the story that captures my heart. I still write the story that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. I'm not thinking about trends. I'm not thinking about what's popular. I'm not thinking about what book lands on the New York Times bestsellers list, because that's not going to get my juices flowing to be able to write authentically. I really have to write that story that bites me, that story that made, like for Yellow Wife, it was like I was afraid of it because it was historical fiction, but I had to step into it in order to create what I needed to create for this next book. So for me, it's not about trends. It's about the book that captures my heart.
You've done historical fiction. Do you feel capable now of taking on other genres? Like you say, you're starting to read mysteries. They're very popular. Or do you see yourself ever writing a mystery?
I'm going to say I'm never going to say never, because I don't want to block any blessings. But goodness gracious, these 2 mystery books that I've just read, I'm like, how in the world? Every genre is a different mechanic. Like it's all right, but it's a different mechanic. Like for me, I don't think I could have told Yellow Wife as a nonfiction book, like to actually do the research and to write a nonfiction story. I don't think that I would have, I don't think I have those skills, or that it would come out right. I did an interview. I have a friend who has a book that's coming out on women in journalism. And she asked me to interview someone for her. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, Ellen. Like having to, first the interview was fun, but actually writing it down and having to stick specifically to the facts. Oh my gosh, that was like pulling hair out one at a time for me, because, I want to create, what I want to create. I want to zhuzh it up and change the story and, put my own touches on it. And it was like, no, that's not what we want. Tell the story. So I think as writers, we all have a genre that is ours. And if you're going to do something else, at least for me, I have to kind of learn it. So mystery writing right now, that seems like tough as nails.
I have a friend who has written both fiction and nonfiction books. And he once said, well, nonfiction's a lot easier because you don't have to write the whole book. You're quoting people, you're citing things. He said, fiction, you have to write everything.
Yeah, I've heard that. I still feel like I'll take fiction any day.
Well, let's see if we have any other questions. I think, I've been reading Love in a Carry-On Bag, and I got a kick out of your character Erica is a publicist for book publishing. I can't imagine where you got that idea. And and she's at a weekend, she's visiting her boyfriend for the weekend, but she has to drop in on an author appearance at a bookshop, and she's taking notes on all the things he's doing wrong without naming names. Were these real things you'd seen people do?
Yeah, so that was publicity to the extreme, which that was kind of my job. Like I was a publicist in the late 90s, and everything was very, very strict and specific. And the way my bosses kind of raised me up in publicity was these were the things you had to do. There was always a checklist. And that was one of the checklists, was to kind of take notes. And all authors don't respond to it the same way, right? So you need to know who your author is and what you can say and what you can't say. Some authors are just more comfortable writing stories and not being out in public, and they don't really want those notes because they're only doing what you ask them to do, and that's it. But then there are some authors who they live for the spotlight and they want to get better, and so those are some of the things that we had to do. But yeah, Erica in Love and Carry On Bad was like publicity to the 10th power. That was the way that I learned how to be a publicist in the late 90s. Yeah.
And you think the job has changed, because it seems like authors are required to do so much more of their own publicity now?
I do think that the job has changed. I see that the publicists have so many books that they have to be responsible for. And I did as well. But it's different because now, like when I was a publicist, there was no like online stuff. Like this was the 90s. So it wasn't like we had social media and all of that to kind of help us along. It was mostly like newspapers, magazines, television. Like that's who I was on the phone with. And so the job has changed over the years because the media has changed.
And so you have your own website with all of your books on it. If book clubs were interested in having you appear, is that where they should go?
Yeah, if you go to my website, which is sadeqajohnson.net, there is a contact form, and it says for book clubs. Just drop your information in there, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Have you been enjoying that, talking to actual readers?
Yeah, that's my favorite part. We haven't started. So my first book club meeting, I think, is in 2 weeks. I think it's the 31st, since the book came out on January 12th. So my first book club meeting is going to be on the 31st, which I'm really looking forward to, because book clubs ask questions a lot of times that I hadn't thought of. And they see things in the story that I didn't necessarily intend when I was writing. But when they say it, I'm always like, oh my gosh, wow, that's a really good point. Like they always do something else. So I do enjoy talking to book clubs.
Well, I think that just about wraps it up for today. I really enjoyed this. Thank you all for joining our webinar today, Inquirer Live. We hope you enjoyed it. On behalf of the Philadelphia Inquirer, I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you so much, Sadeqa.
Ellen, thank you so much. It was so
care.
great to be here.